I'm really excited to introduce today's guest. Roger Thurow is a longtime friend of Food Tank. He is an author and journalist who writes about the persistence of hunger and malnutrition in the world. He served as a reporter at the Wall Street Journal for 30 years and is the author of several books, including Enough, The Last Hunger Season, The First 1,000 Days, and his new book, Against the Grain, How Farmers Around the World Are Transforming Agriculture to Nourish the World and Heal the Planet, which just came out. He is also a recipient of Action Against Hunger's Humanitarian Award. He serves as a senior fellow at the Chicago Council of Global Affairs. He's a fellow in residence at Auburn University. And if I kept reading his bio, we would not have any time for this discussion. But he's one of the people that I admire most in the world because as a journalist and as an advocate, he has worked really hard to highlight these issues that are so important, including the role that small family farmers play around the world. And I just am always been in awe of him and admired him so much. So Roger, thank you for joining me. It's a real pleasure to see you.
Well, thank you, Danny. Great to see you again. And thanks for having me on your show or for this discussion. And it's a mutual admiration society. You know that we met a long time ago when you were making your way across Africa to so many countries and elsewhere around the world, meeting with so many smallholder farmers and agricultural issues. And that was really impressive. And now as you go through your activities for the coming weeks and the coming months, it's exhausting listening to that. And so I always tell everybody, nobody raises the clamor on ending hunger and malnutrition and the need to transform our agriculture system to do that. No one raises the clamor better than you and your colleagues at Food Tank. So congratulations and well done and keep it up.
Thank you. So much credit goes to my co-founder, Bernie Pollock, and of course, Elena Celia, our content director. So thank you for the praise. It means I know it's genuine and it means a lot coming from you. So thank you so much. I first met Roger in 2009. I was so much younger then and very naive, I think, in a lot of ways. But it was when the book he co-authored, Enough, came out. And I remember seeing you speak in DC, Roger, and I was just so inspired and so excited about the work that you were doing. So thank you again for joining me. I want to talk about Against the Grain, this book right here, where everyone can go to their local bookstore or a big company that I won't name and order it right now. But why this book? Why this book and why now?
Well, yeah, thank you for that. And again, thanks for having me and thanks for all your very kind words. Yeah, I think this book is a continuation of the previous books that you mentioned, and thank you for that. Of looking at how we have brought hunger and malnutrition with us into the 21st century and the awfulness, stupidity, obscenity of that. That's the outrage, but the inspiration of that is, there's so many people that are doing things to address that, to finally conquer hunger and malnutrition. And then I've kind of been reporting that and doing so much, spending so much time with smallholder farmers and indigenous farmers, family farmers around the world. The ones, as you pointed out in your newsletter, and so often, the very farmers, that 500 or so million of them, the smallholder farmers, the family farmers, producing more than 80% of the food in the world,
right.
Managing, farming, working on, the large majority of the land that's, filled with, our vital forest and watersheds and wetlands. So truly the stewards of the earth, and just seeing that the challenges that they face and that they're on the front lines of like this great collision of these two main supreme imperatives of humanity, nourishing the planet now and in the coming years and coming time, an unrelenting imperative that we have to do, but at the same time healing the planet, preserving, saving the land from the very consequences of nourishing us. And that great collision is upon these farmers, right? They're on the front lines of this, and they're having to take matters into their own hands. And so against the grain, the title then comes from these farmers then realizing they have to start working in essence against the grain of the practices of modern agriculture that have basically brought them to this stage. And they're challenging, they're asking questions, they're diversifying more, both their crops and thinking, which is really important. So that's kind of why against the grain. And I just figured, and then a lot of reporting. I think it's very important for journalists to do this and others, but particularly for journalists to go back to people that we have written about before, met, or had conversations with. And in doing that, was seeing kind of these changes and these transformations that they're able to do, because, their lands are degraded, their waters are disappearing, their pollinators are fleeing, their biodiversity is waning, the temperatures are getting warmer and hotter. The rains, always mercurial, are even now more mercurial. So they're finding that their agriculture, their farming has turned against them in so many ways, that have left them with these degraded lands. The natural allies of agriculture, lie badly wounded. And they're seeing that we need to, and they need to, work more with nature and what nature gives them, as opposed to bending nature to their will, which is what a lot of agriculture practices, do in order to feed their families, communities. That realizing that the best way to do that now, we need to restore our lands, to bring back the wetlands and their streams and their water levels, and to bring the pollinators back, and the grasses and the bushes and the crops that basically had just disappeared. So all that. So this regenerative agriculture, agroecology, agriculture, whatever it's called, this is what is what confronts them.
Right. And it's both a grim sort of time and an exciting time for the farmers you mentioned. Before we dive a little bit deeper, can you tell us about the cover really quick, because you have a great story about it?
Yes, it's a cover. So I've been saying, and had kind of posted it on LinkedIn and other places, that yes, please, this is one book that you can judge by its cover. I hope you do, and that hopefully that the words inside match, approach somehow the beauty, the allure of the cover, which was taken by my wife Anne. So she's my better ears and eyes through all of this. I'm doing the reporting and the interviewing. She may be recording some, but otherwise she's off taking photos. And so that's where that comes from. So it's a real kind of joint effort between the two of us. But when we were going through the photos and saw that, and I said, hopefully we can use that as the cover. So I think it's very intriguing and alluring. And so, yes, please judge this book by the cover.
That's great. I'm glad Anne is your partner in crime on all these efforts. Roger, you mentioned some words that stuck out for me, right? You said awfulness, stupidity, of some of the agricultural practices that we have been using, that farmers have been encouraged to use, where they, and in some cases forced through subsidies or, past agricultural policies to actually change from the ways of farming with nature to the ways of farming against nature. And, that happened, post Green Revolution in so many countries around the world, but especially Sub-Saharan Africa. Can you talk about sort of that violence we've created in agriculture systems?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and so that these farmers, they've kind of seen the future, right? As it's playing out with the increasing impacts of changing climates, of the environmental degradation, and so that's kind of the warning to us all, that they've seen the future, and it's ugly. I mean, from what you see on their lands and their perspective. But so if we listen to them, we'll see that, but we'll also listen to them and hear them say it doesn't need to be that way. There's not that inevitability. So the book begins with an Ethiopian farmer, Abebe Maliso, and he is saying, as he invites me onto his farm and shows me around, that look, my land, which was once dead, I mean, it was totally denuded,
Right.
is now living again. And so his farm, he was really influential. He's like one of the first farmers that I talked to into reporting, the specific reporting for this book. It's a region in Ethiopia that I was revisiting uh, from when I had first been there in 2003. And so it was at that stage. So there was this huge humanitarian crisis in Ethiopia. It was in 2003, the first famine of the 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
14 million people or so were being fed by food aid, being kept alive if they were going to survive at all by food aid, mainly delivered by the World Food Program. So I was traveling with the WFP to some of the hotspots. And in getting there and in traveling there, you could also see the environmental crisis and disaster
Right.
that was also looming. And what they were seeing is, yes, there were so many people pushed to the verge of starvation and so much, desperation by the famine and the various factors that were causing that, be it drought, markets that just didn't work, agriculture policies and things, development aid, issues gone awry. So all that was kind of culminating there. But they were also seeing that, wow, so many of these farmers, and again, the one of the cruelest ironies, I think, in the world is that the hungriest people in the world, as you well know, and as your members well know, are farmers.
Right.
And the majority of people who receive food aid are farmers. And so a lot of the land was just totally degraded. So that they were then, saying and kind of repeating almost as a mantra that we're going to have to be in here intervening with our food aid forever with these families
Right.
and a growing number of families. And at that stage, it was already like several million that were on these lands that were so degraded. So at that time, here's the largest humanitarian aid organization that is seeing this kind of violence that was happening to the land and to the environmental system, and a lot of it caused by then the agriculture practices. And they were figuring we have to do something about that. So this huge humanitarian agency then also becomes an environmental conservation agency in the sense of really starting to work on restoring land, helping the farmers rehabilitate their land, moving them off the land or saying, please don't farm anymore,
Right.
because you can't, you're farming so much, you can't get anything out of the soil anymore. They had cut down so many forests already. So forest tracts had just disappeared, having a great impact on the climate. And it was, with the slash and burning, as the lands became weaker and yielding less and less of food, it's like, okay, well, we need more land. And so then they would cut down the trees. And so that was backfiring on them. And so then they start with this regenerative agriculture and the rehabilitation. And in essence, farmers, here's how we can work together to restore this land by terracing it, by doing these conservation agriculture plans, so that when the rains do come, it stays, it goes into the soil. And that is what I think the WFP had called it the merit program at the time. That was a program that Abebe and then a number of other farmers were part of. So here I was back basically, so that was 2019 when started the reporting on this, and put it in abeyance during COVID because we wasn't traveling overseas.
Right.
And he was now back on his land. Kind of takes me on a tour of it, and he's got a wild variety of vegetables and kind of a kitchen garden. The crops that he was growing, the maize and the millet and the beans and the peppers and so many other things that he was growing in smaller plots, all on terraced land. Conservation agriculture, the trees, the leaves as they were falling, that was kind of all left there. He said, I'm sorry, it may look a little bit messy, but I've learned to do this. And then he had fruit trees growing up on the entire hem of what was about 4 acres of land. And so at the end of that, I say, wow, Abebe, this is really important and really impressive. But it must take a lot of time and be, exhausting to cultivate all this diversity and be on top of it all the time. Wouldn't it be better, or had you thought about maybe having it all in one crop, like maize or teff or millet? And he looked at me with a quizzical look as if I was stupid, or what are you talking about? And he said, now, why would I do that? It was such a profound question. Now, why would I do that? That influenced my reporting kind of through all the visits then to all the other farms in the other parts of the world. Why would I do that? That, he said, we had done that monocropping of maize. That's what got us to this point, that
Yeah.
our land was degraded and our land was so barren and the rains went away and we cut down the forest and it got so hot. And there's no breeze. And he said, so why would I do that? And so here he was questioning, challenging this diversity on the ground in his crops and in his agriculture practices, but also in his thinking. And he said, I've learned to approach my agriculture with an open mind, and I hope to open the minds of others. So that's kind of the beginning scenario or setting in the book that then, hopefully then introduces all these other farmers, in other parts of the Great Rift Valley. So elsewhere in Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, the Indo-Gangetic Plain, sweeping beneath the Himalayas in India, in the Pan American highlands in Guatemala, and the potato farmers at the roof of the Andes, and then in our own Great Plains in the Midwest with wheat farmers, and seeing kind of what that annual tillage is doing to the soils and to the Great Prairie in Kansas, and in the Lakota Native American community in South Dakota, where they're getting back to their traditional farming practices and also restoring the buffalo herd. Who they say all wisdom comes, and they are the exemplar of regenerative agriculture in the way that the buffalo graze,
Right.
kind of treat the environment and the landscape and things. And so that violence that you had asked about, it's then was so evident that we have to do something about that in these places, even to the World Food Program, or particularly to them, that we have to do something about this. Otherwise, our quest to end hunger and malnutrition will be unending and wretchedly unsuccessful if we don't also do something about the environment and conservation and healing the land and the planet, in addition to feeding it and nourishing it.
Right. And healing people in so many ways by bringing these practices that their ancestors had practiced, for centuries before them. I think it's such a wonderful journey that you take the reader on. One thing that I am interested in, and I think you've heard me say this before, Roger, that it's often farmers as individuals or as groups are blamed for some of the violence that we've been talking about, whether it's deforestation or water pollution. But it's not the farmers who are to blame for this. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And hopefully, the farmers in the book come out as very much as heroes of the story, of the narrative. Every one of them. I think it's right there at the bottom of page 1 or the top of page 2. Here this farmer emerges from this very bleak and desolate landscape on a Bebe's farm, and all of a sudden there's trees and there's plants, and here he comes, and it's a farmer, and it's this hero who has restored his land. My land was dead, and now is living again. And yeah, that blame is totally misplaced. The farmers, particularly smallholder farmers, that's the last thing that they want to do. They know very well the importance themselves of preserving the land. Try as they might. And I think it's clear, and you've covered this in many different ways. Kind of 3 primary things that farmers want or need is, one, to produce food to nourish their families, their communities, their countries, their continent, the world. They want to conserve and preserve their environment, their land. That's what they hope is a generational aspect of it. They've seen their families do it for generations. And then 3, to preserve their livelihoods. And, that's their main task and their goals. And so they're, in most cases, very good, conscientious stewards of the land.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of the advice that they had gotten, just the way the agriculture practices, that they've seen, that they thought would be right. That is the orthodoxy, I guess, of modern agriculture. Then they've seen, okay, that has gotten us to this point. We can see the benefits from that in a sense, but now we see also then the degradation and the concerns that has wrought. And so I think what we need, and Gabisa Jetta, our friend at Purdue, he had told me once that, and it was one of the conferences that he had at his center, at Purdue, that we need this new reckoning, in a sense, where, and if we don't do it now, then when? Of
Right.
kind of looking at agriculture and kind of this last great leap of mankind or challenge, that we can accomplish this, but we have to do it, ending hunger and malnutrition, but do it with a consciousness that's all encompassing.
Right.
It's everything involved in it. It's the ethics, it's obviously the science and the research and the farming and those practices, but it's kind of everything else that goes on, and that we need this new relationship, to the earth, and particularly to rebalance the relationship, say, between farmers and agriculture, and environmentalists and the conservationists. And they need to see themselves as allies as
Absolutely.
opposed to enemies. And it's natural to then see each other as enemies. And, oh, well, you're the ones that are doing this damage, or you're the ones that are having so many regulations that don't allow us to do this important third part, which is to preserve our livelihoods.
Right.
But a coming together that if each side, in essence, there shouldn't be sides, but for everybody to achieve their goals, they have to work together, because everything is there, right?
Right.
So it's the nourishing the planet and healing the planet from the very actions of nourishing us. And I think that's our great challenge
Yeah.
as humanity, and for all of us on this planet.
It really is the greatest challenge. You mentioned both the generational aspect of farming, and the need for economic stability and sustainability for farmers. And I'm wondering if the farmers and farms you visit, do you see a resurgence of young people in these communities who want to get back, who want to come back to the farm if they've left for jobs in the city, who want to be part of food and agriculture because they do see opportunity now? Because we've been losing so many young farmers. Farmers are aging all over the world. What were you seeing on the ground?
Yeah, I do see this, and it's a very great point, and very poignant point, that I think for so long that as they would see the struggles of their parents, right? Particularly farmers in Africa, and in their children, it's like, my goodness, why would we want to do that? We've seen the problems, and we've seen what's happened to the land, right? Well, what's going to be left for us to take care of? So they're thinking immediately, well, what else can we do? How do we get off the farms? And even their parents, the farmers, figuring, oh yeah, are there jobs kind of out of in the cities, beyond the farm, that they can do, that will then provide some income back home? And now I think that the younger generation is then seeing this as one of the great challenges.
Mhm.
And it's exciting and invigorating and inspiring, when they're able to, manifest this creativity and these initiatives, and to question and challenge, and to kind of break out of the orthodoxy and say, well, yeah, here's what we need to do, and how could we shape our farms in this direction? So I think, yeah, taking up this challenge, and realizing that there's more at stake than kind of just their own family plot, but it's something that is, for all of them. And then even so, like here at Auburn, and you've seen it at many of the schools, and universities and high schools that you're at. I think for the younger generation, this is, and there are future leaders. I think they're really wrapping their arms around this challenge, and they're
Yeah.
seeing this, right? That, it's, wow, what kind of world is this going to be when still, 25% of, children under 3 years old or under 5 years old are stunted and malnourished and stunted. And what does that do to their cognitive capacity? We know that that's a crucial part of the stunting, and the lack of promise and productivity that then comes from that. That's such a large percentage of the population. Well, that really restricts our ability to do things, and to kind of shape this world, and improve this world in the future. And so that, and all the climate aspects and environmental aspects, as you know, are so front and center
Mhm.
in their minds and thinkings. So I think that becomes this great call to action, to this generation, to
Sure.
all generations.
Right.
But yeah, as they're looking to the future, and then yeah, so in the family farms, around you, you see that. I mean, in say a lot of the indigenous communities and Native American communities, as they get back to the practices of the past, right? Because they're seeing the harm that it's causing. When you look at the health status of communities around the world, particularly in the United States, it's like, wow, what's happening here,
Right.
and that it all comes back to food. And so, yeah, I think I think there's a growing realization that this is where it's at in doing things for the future.
That's wonderful to hear. I'm glad you're seeing that on the ground. And I've seen that in my own work as well. And it does give me hope and a lot of inspiration. You mentioned this before, Roger, but I think it bears worth repeating. One thing that this book does really well is talk about diversity, and not just diversity of crops, although that's very important, but diversity of people who are involved in agriculture, diversity of thought, diversity of practices. I like that you're not highlighting, that there's no silver bullet approach here. You're looking for folks to understand that there are lots of tools to use to create a planet that is both nourished and healed.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the finding of the realization that some of the silver bullets, what we thought as silver bullets, have badly misfired. In the chapter on Uganda, as part of kind of what's going on in the Great Rift Valley, there's a farmer, Daniel Sebekaki, who farms along the Nile, and kind of using the wetlands and the forest there, kind of that he was grazing cattle amongst the trees, kind of doing the agroforestry. He had some corn, some maize, some beans, and some other crops. And then here came this orthodoxy that was moving through, and this kind of this modern trend. Oh, sugarcane. That's the thing that everybody's getting into, right? Now, sugarcane doesn't get along well with trees. And so he then set about to clear several acres of trees and plant sugarcane. And he's like in his 30s, right? And why he was doing this, because he figured, oh, here's the riches and the promise of the riches that was coming then from the sugar visions and the sugar dreams, the sugar plum dreams. And he has 4 children, and it was like, this is what's going to help me put them through school and put them through high school, maybe go to university, and this will be great. Clears his land of trees, even poured, chemicals down the termite mounds and the termites and everything, obviously, in the soil that is so important for agriculture and also great allies of agriculture, to kind of kill them, because sugarcane also doesn't get along with termites. And so he's clearing all that from his land, and he plants sugarcane. And there, maybe 18 months till the sugarcane matures, 18 months to 2 years. And as it was growing in the fields, then he got word from the company, the sugarcane plant that he had a contract with, to sell the sugarcane to. Well, we're full. We're not going to, we can't take your crop. That was happening to a number of farmers. The farmers then were setting against each other that, oh, there's too much sugarcane now being grown. So how do they kind of sabotage others? So then one night he gets a call from a neighboring farmer that says, hey, your sugarcane field's on fire.
Oh my gosh.
It burned down. He lost everything. Whatever sugarcane didn't burn, there were no other markets for it. Anywhere near in the country, he couldn't get the license to take it across the border to Kenya. So when I saw him, it was a couple of years after that. And within the matter of like 5 minutes in our conversation, he had used the word regret. What have I done? I so regret what I did, probably a half dozen times.
Wow.
My wife and I both were picking up on that. And it was remarkable. And he said, how could I do that? Why did I do that? Everybody was cutting down trees. That was the orthodoxy of the agriculture that we should follow for our riches. And I've lost everything. So now he's back replanting trees. His land is replenished. The bushes are growing. The grasses are there. The trees are, he points to the distance. See, those were the trees that were here. That's what we're bringing back again. So it's that realization. Here's a young man trying to do what he thought was the best for the future for him and his family, and figuring, nope, absolutely wrong. We got to get back working with nature instead of bending nature to our will. I'm going to plant this, thinking that's the way to his increased income and preserving his land, but realizing it did just the opposite. And so it's kind of through that it's like, oh, again, what have I done, and the regret. So he's asking questions. So every one of the chapters begins, the chapter title is a question that the farmers themselves are asking.
It's such an open-minded way of presenting this material, Roger, because it's farmer-centered. It's their story. You're just giving them this vehicle to tell it. And whether they regret these practices that they've used in the past or not, the hope is that they're moving forward in a very different way. And sort of, as you said, the title says it all. They're going against the grain of what they've been told and what they're still being told. And so I'm wondering, we encourage farmers to question the practices they've used. How do we encourage policymakers to question the policies that they've put in place?
Yeah, no, exactly. So I listened in on your conversation with Jim McGovern the other day, and obviously he's been one that's been questioning and fulminating, and railing for years on this front and asking the questions. Yet it just needs to become more contagious.
Yeah.
That people do that they see that, and it's like, why are we doing this? Or yeah, a baby again, now why would I do that? Thinking I'm crazy for asking him
Right.
why don't you do this thing that's got farmers all over the world? I know that's what farmers around the world is. That's what we did, and it got us to this stage. And so yeah, kind of the questioning and getting comfortable with the notion that we need to do things differently. uh, and that these farmers, and realizing that the policymakers, they don't have all the questions, they don't have all the answers themselves, right? And
Right.
so I think what happened after the Green Revolution is we patted ourselves on the back, even though Borlaug warned mightily against complacency, right? That if we become complacent and hunger and malnutrition remain with us, it will be a crime against humanity. The guilt will be so great that we can't bear that as a people. Well, that's the stage we've come to. This complacency, this accepting of the orthodoxy, and we figured that we had asked, that we had all the answers, right? And it turns out we haven't been asking the right questions all this time, and in many cases, not answering any questions at all. So that's what I found profound in terms of in meeting with these farmers all over, that they were asking these questions and like, why do we do things like this? And
Yeah.
it struck me, in Ethiopia, I had done just on previous trips there and had been to I think it's their Natural History Museum in Addis Ababa, where the remains and the bones of Lucy that was found she was found in the Afar Desert, and was at the time of the discovery thought to be maybe our oldest living relative in a sense. So we've often turned to the Great Rift Valley of Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, and the discoveries of the leakies and everything for clues to our past.
Right.
In talking to the farmers there in those countries, they now become our guides to the future. These descendants of Lucy that are farming there, they're our guides to the future. We need to look to them, yes, still for clues to the past, but clues to the future, because again, they've seen the future, and it's like, we can't go there. We have to change this, and we need to pay heed to that. So I think our politicians, the decision makers, realizing that, yeah, they need to start asking the questions. They themselves don't have the answers. Maybe some of them do, and we need to listen to them. But we also need to listen to those on the front lines of all of this, who are there as this great collision happens, and it's on their farms and their ranches and their
Mhm.
ponds and their seas and their oceans and their rivers. Need to listen to them wherever they are, including so many of them obviously in the United States as well.
Absolutely. One of the things that you were able to do is highlight the Rockefeller Foundation's Vision 2050 prize winners, and
Yes.
some of them who I've been able to interview. You mentioned the indigenous folks in here in North America. Can you talk a little bit about that project?
Yeah, so it's remarkable. So I had been talking to them and the Rockefeller folks uh, kind of through the years as I was starting the reporting on this, and the reporting on this then developed over years from kind of the reporting even on the past books.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, these farmers, okay, I'm writing about whatever for the present project or book then, but it was like, no, they're onto something here. And then again, the value of going back. And so I was talking to them about it, the Rockefeller Foundation folks, and they said, yeah, they were doing this Vision 2050 project, and taking applications from people all over the place, all over the world. And I said, oh, at some stage when you get to the finalist or whatever, as they sort through them, I'd like to hear some of the stories that they're doing. So then when they were down to their 10 finalists, they had made their awards too. I was going through them. I think they had their videos or their films of kind of each of them, you know, and now a bigger film will be coming out. And some of them then matched up to the places where I was going.
Right.
And, you know, the urban farmers in Nairobi are fascinating. So is Indian formal settlements. And so one of the things that we're facing, kind of from the original, you know, the efforts of the Green Revolution in Borlaug's mind, and indeed what he wanted a Nobel Peace Prize for, what they said at the time, was he diffused this kind of Gordian knot that was hanging over the country or over the world about, you know, will population growth and expanding population kind of overrun our ability to nourish ourselves and feed ourselves. That original race is still there, and then now it's complicated by all these other factors that have then emerged from the Green Revolution, some of them consequences of it, and the pesticides and the fertilizer use and the irrigation and the dwindling, you know, levels of the underground water and the water reservoirs and things. So kind of all this that's come together, you know, them, you know, realizing this and then figuring. Yeah, I mean, kind of what could be done, and then going back and then hearing these stories, that it then becomes really profound in terms of what they need to do. And so, your question had another part to it. What was that?
It was about the Indigenous
yes.
project.
Oh, the Vision 250. Anyway, back on track. I digress. It's Hunter Thompson.
No.
Nothing to about. I digress. Back to the topic. So in Nairobi, it's expected to like triple its population by 2050. Nairobi, because people are coming in all the time,
right,
from the countryside and the areas where the food is being grown, and the country as a whole is then expected to like triple in population by 2100. But Nairobi, like by 2050, and it's like, you know, where's this food coming from? Because as then the city expands, well, it's expanding to the rural areas where the farms were that were then feeding and providing food to the city and the urban residents. And so they've realized, these groups, and again, they're youngsters. They're you know, some of them, and their names kind of their organizations reflect that. Of, you know, they may have been you know, gang members in the communities,
right,
and in these informal settlements. And they're turning from like creating instability to basically now working towards food stability and security. So insecurity to security, and realizing, and then COVID comes, and then the war in Ukraine. And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, all these factors are limiting the food that's coming in here. Food prices are rising. We have to grow our own. So out of all these initiatives from the Rockefeller Foundation, I think one of the common themes is it's food sovereignty,
right,
grow your own, grow our own. And that whole interface then between the growing population, where's our food coming from? That is then moving a lot of people, and particularly young people. And so I think that's a great example of kind of the urban farming and urban agriculture that's going on in Nairobi. Towards your question of, you know, how is the youth getting involved in this, or the motivation of them, they're really fired up about this. That's amazing to see. And in the urban agriculture efforts in New Delhi, you know, those farmers are getting buffeted again by a lot of the practices that come from the areas of India where the Green Revolution took root, say in the Punjab. And so when we were there, it was after the rice season, and they were going into, I think, the wheat season, and that follows that. And so they burned their stubble in the field. And so all this smoke comes up. It adds to the horrible pollution that's usually around Delhi. Temperatures rise. And, you know, it was impacting the crops and the vegetable crops of these farmers. And like their gourds were pale, you know, the leaves of the herbs and spices were pale. And it's like, wow, why don't these people stop burning their fields and their stubble? And it's like, how do we change their minds? And these farmers themselves had done that at one stage. And so they, again, then were realizing, but then those efforts then, okay, farmers need a market. And here's
Right.
this huge market in Delhi, in the urban markets, there needs to be more of a connection there, right? As opposed to kind of growing, these foods, kind of for the staple foods in the main crops,
Hmm.
the rice, the wheat, the beans, the maize, you know, really then putting the emphasis on crops that people are eating and that are so vital for Indian cuisine. So these farms there, again, 1 acre, 2 acres, a fraction of an acre or so, alive and abundant and radiant in all these herbs and vegetables that are so critical. And they know there's a market there. So they then, take the initiative. If you grow it, we got a market for it and we'll sell
Hmm.
it. So that kind of inspiration. And so there's a lot of the youngsters in those family farms that are too. And in on the Lakota community in South Dakota, again, a big food sovereignty initiative. And we see the violence of the past and the history of our country and their relationship, particularly with the destruction of their ways of farming, taking them off the land, removing the land, the destruction of the buffalo, and them having to depend then on modern agriculture.
Right.
And you see the impacts on their health in these communities. And so they're like food sovereignty, right? Food is, I think one of them says, and in one of the films, the videos from the Rockefeller Foundation, that, food is the ultimate way to control a community or a population, right? We need to get that back and to have our food sovereignty. And so there you see those things, and they're also then particularly targeted for how do we get the youth involved in those programs. So those are just 3 of the 10 or however many there were in the Vision 250,
Sure.
the 2050
Yeah.
program. And
Yeah.
so, visiting them was really inspiring.
Absolutely. Had a very little role in being one of the judges for the Rockefeller Vision Prize. And it was so exciting to see all of these initiatives from all over the world sort of come together and be inspired from all of the hope that is out there. Roger, before we turn to maybe about 10 minutes of questions and answers, I'm wondering if you can give sort of your call to action. What do you hope people take away from this book ultimately?
Uh, yeah, great question. I think it's we need to listen and trust and hear the wisdom and the experiences of the world's smallholder farmers, the indigenous farmers, the family farmers, wherever they may be. As you point out, the 500 million plus of these farmers who are producing the majority of our world's food. Please, can we listen to their experiences? They're on the front lines. They will show us the way. They are showing us the way. Let's pay attention to that. They're asking questions. It's marvelous. To do likewise, to say, well, how can we do this? To not accept, the orthodoxy and the way things have been. And, as one sees in many of these instances, well, there was a reason for the way that the way our agriculture system evolved. But you have to question. You have
Yeah.
to, I think, Dr. Borlaug in our talks with him and myself and Scott Kilman when we were at the Wall Street Journal and Writing Enough, and also with Dr. Swami Nathan, his
Right.
period in Green Revolution in India, they would always talk about, they would recognize the problems of it, and would get quite agitated and say, look, it was never meant to be a static moment in time.
Right.
It was meant to be an evergreen revolution, to adapt to this,
Right.
to keep questioning, to listen to these farmers that we want to benefit by this. And if we're not benefiting by them by this, as then has been the case and has turned out, we need to listen to them about what needs to be done. So it definitely has to be two-sided. In fact, even more from the side of the smallholder farmers, of that their wisdom, their deep wisdom, and their experiences and what we can learn from that. And it has to be, you have to, because who knows the actions that we take today on anything, what the impacts and the consequences might be. And in many cases, there are all sorts of unintended consequences. In a lot of cases, they're disastrous, as we know from
Right.
kind of whatever we do. That's certainly what then has come to pass, I think, in agriculture. And we have to be, open enough and mature and confident enough to say, okay, what do we need to do to both nourish and heal? There's
I
no
love it.
alternative to it. It's unrelenting, these two imperatives. We have to nourish ourselves, right? The nourishment has to be there, whatever manner. And we have to ensure that by the very act of nourishing us, we're also healing and preserving and protecting the land,
Sure.
planet, and all of us that are on it. We're all linked by the global food chain, right? Whether it's us as humans or the tiny insects that we can't even see in the ground, we're all connected. So kind of if one is imperiled, or all these forms or members of nature that lie badly wounded, they're the allies of agriculture. They need to be strengthened and preserved and well maintained for the sake of all of us. So
Absolutely. Nourish and heal. Major message from this book. Also, Roger, you used the word, making these farmer-centered approaches contagious before. So here's hoping that food sovereignty, regenerative agriculture, and this idea of healing and nourishing all become contagious and go viral. So thank you. I'd love to open
absolutely.
it. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say absolutely, and give credit where credit is due, right?
Right.
And so it's these very communities that had been practicing that, and then again through kind of the violent actions of society against them, or kind of what was happening, and as things kind of developed, in the orthodoxy that sets in, that overturned, or I mean, in agriculture, it plowed all that under, and so that coming back again, right, is really what we need to do. So that needs to be contagious. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I can't agree more. I want to open it up for a few minutes of questions. Does anyone want to use the raise their hand function? You can just take yourself off mute too.